Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host, Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. This week we spoke to Paul from OwnerzEdge about his books that help homeowners work with contractors and what should be in the contract.
Exciting.
Hi, Paul. I was on your OwnerzEdge website, and I wanted to learn more about your ebooks. Who are these books written for?
Anyone who is either getting ready to build new, retain a design professional, or hire a contractor for any kind of building or remodeling project, these books are for them.
And what's your background?
I grew up in the house that my dad built starting at age 4. I was in shop classes in school from 5th grade through senior and high school. Went to work for a general contractor as a carpenter's apprentice in 1979. After working another 10 years in the industry, struck out on my own in 1986 and operated 2 separate award-winning construction companies. The first one in the Washington, D.C. area from 1986 until 2012, and then in Greenville, South Carolina from 2012 until 2021. So that's my background in construction.
So your books are teaching how to work with a contractor.
Not only how to work with a contractor, but all of the information they need to know ahead of time. OwnerzEdge is what you need to know before building or remodeling, literally because what customers don't know can and will hurt them if they end up in court. So over the years, when I worked as a general contractor, and then now in the last 3 years, operating a consulting business, I serve people as an expert witness. So construction projects that have failed, people that have a slip and fall accident where it's related to a construction defect or something like that, I'm called in as an expert to represent a plaintiff or a defendant and help them prove their case. What was born out of that was OwnerzEdge, because the information that is contained within the ebooks of OwnerzEdge is critical to helping homeowners prevent themselves from getting in a situation where they can end up in court.
Do your books help with how to write a contract or how to review a contractor's contract?
A little bit of both, and I highly recommend for legal purposes that homeowners do not prepare the contract themselves, for the simple fact that most states state that whoever prepares the contract has the onus of making sure that everything is what it's supposed to be. So in other words, if the homeowner prepares the contract and there's something that's ambiguous and they end up in court, it falls back on the homeowner. When the contractor prepares the contract, it falls back on him. So the information in my books is designed for the homeowners. If they don't see that information in the contract presented by the contractor, that they simply go back to the contractor and say, hey, everything looks good, but I want this stipulation and I want this provision and I want that provision and so forth in the contract to protect myself.
Do the books have a checklist of what should be in the contract?
I don't have a checklist per se, for the simple fact that a contract is not what I would consider to be, from my experience, a specific checklist of items. There are, terms and conditions in a contract. There are, the homeowner's name and address and the project address and other information that needs to be there, but not really what I would call a checklist type thing.
Okay.
That said, there's a table of contents in each book based on each section that they can go through. For instance, I've got ebooks on kitchen remodeling, on bath remodeling, on additions, on whole house remodeling, new home construction, hiring a design professional, and the like. And within those individual ebooks would be the information and the table of contents with each section that they would need to follow. Because people are individuals, there's going to be something that they want to see in their contract that somebody else looks at and says, I really don't care about that.
Sure.
So anyway, that's why I have not created it as a checklist type format, because again, it's going to be individualized. They don't have to have every single thing in there. It's just that based on who they are and what is concerning to them is what I recommend that they then go back to the contractor and ask that the contractor put that language in his contract.
And is there much of a difference between the items you would want in the contract for a kitchen remodel versus a home addition, for example?
Not as much different items. For instance, if you're doing an addition versus a kitchen, there's going to be significantly more information in the addition book than there would be in the kitchen book. For instance, there's going to be information on what you need to consider as far as a foundation, what you need to consider as far as making sure that finished floor levels end up being exactly the same, making sure that heating and air conditioning systems tie in properly, electrical systems tie in properly. Whereas, when you're doing a kitchen remodel, 9 times out of 10, it's simply going to be removing existing fixtures and finishes, capping off plumbing and electrical lines, and then extending with the new kitchen and new layout.
It's interesting that you mentioned putting in the contract something you think would be obvious, like the finished floor levels should be the same height.
Oh my goodness, there's no question. I mean, as an example, when I had my business in Greenville, South Carolina, I had a client that called me as an expert where they had a major remodeler in the area that had built an addition off the back of the house, and the addition was coming off of a kitchen and family room area where it was a hardwood floor transition, and it was a 3/4-inch step up from the original house into the new living area, simply because the contractor did not set the foundation and the framing right to allow for the thickness of the subfloor. And we're talking about a $300,000 addition that there was literally at that point nothing the owner could do.
One of the things that caught my eye on your website was there's stuff you don't know that you don't know.
What's interesting is when I did construction work, my contract was about 63 pages long. And it covered everything almost from the dawn of time through driving the final nail and providing the warranty information. And I had a number of people over the years, tell me, oh my gosh, this is almost like, signing a mortgage for a house. And I'd say, well, yeah, but, keep in mind what we're talking about here. I don't want to come to a point where either one of us are kicking the dirt one day, frustrated, because as the contractor, in order to avoid being sued or not being paid my final payment or something like that, I don't want there to be a misunderstanding. And I don't want to have to cough up funds that I had not planned for when I, gave you an initial budget just to finish the project up. And on top of that, I don't want a situation where you're telling all your friends and your coworkers and your relatives and everything else, well, it's beautiful, but it was a pain in the neck getting there, and it was like pulling teeth, and I had all these problems. One word in a contract can have an incredibly significant meaning. And I'll give you an example of that. Years ago, I was doing a project for the CEO of a major company back in the Washington, D.C. area. We built a standalone garage as well as replaced the 3 garage doors on the existing garage that he had. So we had 5 new custom mahogany garage doors. Each garage door was $12,000 a piece. Now, mahogany, from a wood standpoint, is considered a relatively soft member of the hardwood family. When you work with that wood, when you stain it, if you don't stain it properly, you can get splotching, and it looks horrible. And I came up to the job site one day. Well, before I came up to the job site, I wrote into the contract with the painting contractor that he was to use a pre-stain prior to staining those doors. Well, I pull up to the job site, and one door had already started to be stained, and I could see the splotching already. And I contacted the guy. I said, did you all not use the pre-stain? What are you talking about? I said, look at your contract. I told you that you need to use the Minwax pre-stain prior to using the stain finish on these doors. Well, he calls me back a few minutes later. He says, I wasn't paying attention to that. I just do it the way I normally do it. And I said, well, there's a reason that I write this there. So keep in mind, at $12,000 a piece for 5 garage doors, if I hadn't had that one word in that subcontract, I would have eaten $60,000 of the doors.
Wow. So your books not only help to make sure that you have a good contract with the contractor, but also how to protect yourself with subcontractors.
No question.
Very
because 9 out of 10 contractors these days subcontract out just about everything. Very few contractors, especially in the residential arena, are true general contractors where they have their own carpenters employed, they have their own other tradesmen and so forth employed. 9 times out of 10, it's subcontracted out.
You also have details on how the schedule of work should be written into a contract.
Correct. Again, many contractors today, instead of giving you a written schedule, will just simply say, okay, we're going to start on April the 15th and we're going to finish on August the 1st. The customer has no idea in between what's going on, how they can schedule their lives, especially if it's a remodeling project. Let's say they've got their kitchen torn out. They're doing a kitchen with an addition or something like that. So a major portion of their house is affected. Busy moms, you got, 2 or 3 children running around the house. You've got a schedule to maintain, and not knowing what's going on from one day to the next is enough to drive anybody crazy. In today's day and age, the different software that's available to contractors, that they can create a schedule, and then if something changes, if something needs to be updated, the schedule can be updated. It can be emailed directly to the customer. The contractor's not getting phone calls every other day. Well, nobody's here today. What's going on?
Right.
Oh, well, that's okay. That's because we're waiting for the rough-in inspection. And as soon as the rough-in inspection is complete, then the guys will be back out to start hanging drywall and do installation work and all that. Having a written schedule that you can hold the contractor's feet to the fire with is critically important, especially when you're talking about a renovation project.
You recommend detailing the payment schedule on the contract?
No question. Not only the work, but the payment schedule, which is another, to me, incredibly important factor. JC, if I had a nickel for the number of contracts that I have seen where the contractor submits the contract and the payments go something like this. Initial deposit required at contract signing, 50%. We will invoice you every other week throughout the project. Final payment due upon receipt. Well, okay, so here's the deal. J. Paul Getty years ago said that you only extend that credit which you can afford to lose. A kitchen project today, for an average kitchen, it's not at all out of the question to drop $100,000 in a kitchen.
Oh.
All right? So if the contractor tells you that he needs $50,000 up front to order the cabinets and the countertops and all that kind of stuff, the homeowner better be prepared to lose $50,000. One, because the average contractor in America has less than $10,000 in the bank, and many of them, from what I have witnessed, are taking money from one project to pay for the costs and so forth on another.
Wow.
It's like a Ponzi scheme. So you better be prepared to lose that deposit, unless, again, according to my materials, you follow the money and you follow that deposit properly. The next thing that they do is they invoice on time. So they'll say that they'll invoice you on the 1st of the month and the 15th of the month, or maybe they'll just invoice you every 30 days or whatever it is.
Okay.
But they'll invoice you based on that time. Well, if that time period has gone by and no work has taken place, they can still invoice you. And if you don't pay them and you say, well, wait a second, Joe, you invoiced me the last time I paid that, but there's been no work that's taken place since then. Oh, yeah, well, this, that, and the other. But, hey, the contract says that I can invoice you now and either you pay me or I simply don't come back.
So it's important to tie payment to the finished projects.
Well, not only to finished projects, but to work in progress.
Okay.
For instance, let's take a kitchen remodel project as the example that we've been talking about this morning. The first phase would be demolition, framing, and trades rough-in. So mechanical, which is HVAC, plumbing, and electrical rough-in, right?
Okay.
When those items are complete, then the invoice would become due, and the owner should pay that. Okay, I live in Florida, so most of the homes here in Florida are what they call a slab on grade, meaning that, there's no basement underneath and floor joists and that kind of stuff. So the plumbing work that has to be installed, let's say that there's an island, has to go underneath the concrete for the drain work and the supply pipes and all that kind of stuff. Well, if the plumber's come along and he simply has installed the drain pipes, but he hasn't installed the water supply pipes and so on and so forth, the rough-in work is not, in fact, complete. So he shouldn't be invoicing for incomplete plumbing rough-in work. You invoice for completed tasks. Then at the end, there's also something that's critically important and mostly used in the commercial construction arena, but it absolutely applies in residential work, and that is what they call a substantial completion payment and final payment. Again, most contractors put in their contract that when they're complete, they're going to invoice you that final invoice.
Okay.
Well, many times there's punch list work that needs to be done. There's minor things that are left undone, and in some cases There's a lot that's left undone, and the contractor says, hey, I'm finished. You owe me the final check. Homeowner sticks up their hand and says, wait a second, time out. You're not finished. We've been going back and forth with emails for the last few weeks, and I've been frustrated about this and unhappy about that. And so not until these things are complete do you get your final check. Contractor comes back and says, no, I'm sorry. This is what my contract says. I say I'm finished. I'm invoicing you. If you don't pay me, I'm not coming back. So now what does the homeowner do? They have an unfinished project that they're not happy with. And if they don't pay that, the contractor doesn't come back. So now they have one of two choices: live with it, hire somebody else at additional cost to finish it up, or take the contractor to court.
Right.
Neither one of which of the three scenarios, as far as I'm concerned, is an acceptable scenario for the homeowner that's already paid what they've paid. So with my ebooks, what I recommend is that they request that the contractor in the contract put in that at substantial completion, when the contractor says he is substantially complete, the homeowners and the contractor will walk through the site and they will agree, yes, the project is at substantial completion. And they will agree on the amount that is to be released at that point in time. And that the final amount, I typically recommend about 5%, the final completion, when everything is done and the contractor has provided the warranty, then he gets his final check. And only when the contractor and the homeowner agree that the work is final and complete and acceptable.
Very interesting. One of your books is called Contract Sample Terms. What type of things would you find in that?
Sure. This is a pretty substantial document. It's 28 pages long. And so, again, as I mentioned earlier, there are some things that are important to some and not important to others. And sometimes I've had clients that say, well, heck with it. I'll just say that I want all these terms and conditions in the contract.
Sure.
As long as they don't create the contract, they simply send over to the contractor what they want to see. Then, contractor puts it in his contract, issues it back, they're golden. But an example of that would be the payment schedule that we just talked about. So, how the deposit should be handled, how installment payments should be handled, and then the timing of the payments, again, tied in with the actual scope of the work and progress of the work. You've got Article 3, date of commencement and substantial completion. When are you going to start? When are you going to finish? What does a normal workday look like? In other words, I put down a normal workday would be from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., Monday through Friday. That way somebody's not surprised when somebody shows up on Saturday morning and their 17-year-old daughter's walking through the house with no makeup on and like, well, what the heck is this contractor doing here? Article 4, unforeseen conditions and hourly rates. So it establishes up front that the contractor has to have walked through that home, made himself aware of everything that's there so that the homeowner doesn't get stuck with an unexpected additional charge. Which, by the way, in the industry, according to the Department of Commerce, Federal Department of Commerce, 9 out of 10 construction projects go over budget. And the average amount that they go over budget is 28%. So going back to that kitchen remodel project that I was talking about, where it's not unusual to spend $100,000 on a kitchen, if the project goes 28% over, that's $28,000. If somebody's gone and gotten a home equity line, do they have that extra $28,000 sitting in their bank account? Because the bank is likely not going to, stroke them an additional check for that. So, things like that, making sure if there's additional hourly work done, and I recommend against any hourly work, that you establish up front what that's going to look like. Again, all of that language is in there. Change orders and change directives and communication. How are change orders going to be handled? I mean, a contractor should not just hand you a change order and expect that everything is okay. A change order is something that's negotiated between the contractor and the owner. It's an addendum to the contract. The owner doesn't have to just take verbatim what the contractor says. He has the right to come back and say, well, wait a second, I'm not sure if I agree with this, and how much are you charging for that, and so on and so forth. So that's how that's handled. I get into communication, a phone call or a text message, email, whatever, how all that takes place, and what is an acceptable time frame for communication. For example, in the terms and conditions, I put down, the following shall establish communication standards for the project. Extremely important, need to talk right away, it's a phone call. Important, need to talk within the hour, is a text message. Regular business, within 24 hours of the next business day, is an email. that right there establishes how the communication is going to take place. And, if a homeowner is getting a phone call from a contractor, they know that they need to deal with that right away. Gets into relationship of parties, subcontractors and other contracts. That contractor is supposed to have workman's compensation insurance, but if his policy has lapsed for whatever reason, the homeowner is 100% liable for that injury. If there's a hold harmless agreement between the contractor and the homeowner, and that workman's compensation policy has gone bad, the homeowner is held harmless. Most people have no clue that this kind of information is, required or even exists, and what they open themselves up to when they have somebody to come work in their home.
You have a book on lien releases. Isn't that usually part of a contract, or is that something you need to have a contractor add?
It's supposed to be, but in the last 3 years, JC, the number of contracts that I have reviewed, I haven't seen one lien release supplied by a contractor. And so there's two types of lien releases. There's a partial and there's a final. And with every payment invoice, a partial lien release should be submitted, including the deposit that the contractor requests at the outset. The partial lien release essentially holds the owner harmless in the event that the contractor hasn't paid his bills. And that includes, suppliers, subcontractors, employees, whoever has worked on that job has lien rights. And 9 times out of 10, the owner has no clue how many hands have been involved in that pie. And nothing worse than, the owner's paid for the project, and all of a sudden 2 months later, they get an invoice from a supplier for $15,000 and say, hey, Joe Schmo didn't pay me. I want my money.
Yeah, scary.
Well, wait a second. I paid the contractor. Yeah, well, he didn't pay me, and I delivered the materials to your house. So guess who owes the money? Well, with the lien release accompanying each payment application or invoice, all of that goes away. And then the final lien release is one that says, okay, the project is complete. We have received all of the money. We now, as a contractor, take on all liability and all responsibility for anything that's outstanding related to this project. End of story.
Is there a main type of insurance you should confirm that a contractor has?
Yes. The first one that most people are aware of is general liability insurance. That covers if the contractor's working and he's got a tradesman working up in an attic or something, and all of a sudden the thing catches a rafter on fire before you know it, the whole house burns down. So that's their general liability insurance that covers that. Workman's compensation insurance covers any tradesman working at the site that get injured, killed, whatever. Above that, the owner wants to make sure that there is something called an inland marine policy, as well as a builder's risk insurance. For instance, on this kitchen project that we've been talking about in this episode, the contractor has ordered $50,000 worth of cabinets. And all of a sudden, he gets a notification that the cabinets overturned on the truck and they're destroyed. The general liability policy doesn't cover that. The inland marine and the builder's risk are going to make up that and ensure that those cabinets are replaced. Here in Florida, if the project is halfway underway and a hurricane comes along and damages materials or equipment or whatever else that the contractor had there, those policies cover the replacement cost of those kind of things as well. So if your contractor doesn't have the proper insurance and something occurs in the middle of the project, he could end up being bankrupted. And again, the homeowner's left holding the bag.
How would a homeowner check that the contractor has valid insurance?
There's a thing called a declaration page. Accord is the name of the company that provides the declaration pages that show what type of coverage the contractor has.
Okay.
Through my materials, it's recommended that the homeowner ask for copies of the contractor's declaration pages of insurance, and they can simply contact the producer and say, hey, I'm getting ready for a project. I want to understand what the contractor is covered for.
Yeah, very smart. Do you have tips on hiring a contractor?
I wrote a book about 10 years ago called Residential Building and Remodeling, a straight talk about the industry process. And in chapter 4 of that book, I describe how hiring a contractor is a lot like getting married. You go through an entire range of emotions on a building or remodeling project.
Sure.
There's a lot of personal things involved, personal spaces in your home. I mean, it is your home. It's going to be your haven, your safe space, your castle, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, what I recommend about hiring a contractor or even design professional is that you go through what I call a dating process. And just like when you were getting married, you didn't go out on the very first date and come home and tell mom and dad, well, we just got engaged and we get married tomorrow. You spend a lot of time getting to know the individual. And when it comes to construction, the larger the project, the more time I recommend you spend interacting with that professional. I'm a type A personality. It drives me crazy when people are late. It drives me crazy when people don't do what they say they're going to do. When they have something written down and they come back and they say, oh, well, that's not what I really meant by that, even though that's what I wrote, and so on and so forth. If you spend the time ahead of time getting to know the individual and getting to know how they act, do they show up for their appointments on time? Do they deliver the materials they said that they were going to deliver in the previous meeting? By going through that process and seeing, okay, are they able to maintain schedules in the process leading up to the project? If they're not going to maintain the schedule then in the dating and engagement process, the getting married part where you actually sign the contract, after you're walking down the aisle, the likelihood it's going to get any better is pretty slim to none.
Right.
There is a very specific hiring process, and quite frankly, in all of my materials, I go through what that process is, what you should look out for, what are red flags and so forth. In today's day and age, most people will simply go online. They'll do a Google search. They'll do a Facebook search. They'll ask their friends, and then they'll go online and they'll see the contractor's website, and they'll see all the pretty pictures and everything else. They'll see the testimonials, but the contractors never put up, or nobody ever puts up, the failed projects, the customers that weren't happy, the projects that they ended up in court over. They're only going to put their best foot forward. So making sure that you follow a known process. In the 35 years that I had my business, I never had one customer take me to court. I had customers that I had to take to court because they simply didn't abide by the contract, but never had one take me to court. And by the way, I did my homework to the extent that the most a contract ever went over budget with me was 3%. And that's because I took the time to do the homework to figure out what the project was going to entail, knowing that I could complete the work at the original budget without, having change orders and additional costs.
Is there any way you can make sure you get a professional-looking drywall finish when you hire a contractor?
Great question. So what I recommend in my materials is that you establish a submittal or a sample of the finished work. Whether a kitchen, whether an addition, a whole home, whatever, you're going to pay the contractor to provide a sample of something like this. In my opinion, it's absolutely worth it for the simple fact that you can have a drywall job that looks fantastic at 9 o'clock in the morning. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the sun is setting and it's coming through all the back windows of the house and it's casting shadows, and you see every nail pop, you see every seam, you see every head seam, you're like, holy mackerel, what the heck is that? And then the contractor comes back and says, well, that's the finish. I mean, what do you want me to do? There's level 4 and 5 drywall finishes. Level 5 is wicked expensive. You typically don't need to pay for that. But if you simply have the contractor establish ahead of time a sample area of the work and say, okay, this is what we're going to consider an acceptable finish, and you all get together and you say, yep, okay, this is fine, sign off on it in writing, then later on, if there's a question, you allow the situation to be objective and not subjective. And you can take pictures at different times of the day and night. That's why I would recommend, depending on where the drywall work is, what windows and doors you have, how light is going to be cast at different times of the day. I even recommend that paint colors are selected with large swatches, like 3 foot by 4 foot swatches on the wall, okay, and that paint color is observed at different times of the day. Because sometime of the day it's going to look warm, sometimes it's going to look cold. If you're using, mid-tone and deep-tone colors, they are going to show differently at different times of the day, and with natural sunlight versus, the light that's going to be on in the evening. Rather than getting the whole house or the whole area painted, and the customer says, well, that's horrible. I didn't realize it was going to look like that.
Right?
Well, I'm sorry you didn't realize it was going to look like that, but that's what you asked me to paint, and this is the color that you gave me. So having all of these things ironed out ahead of time, I just can't begin to tell you the time and the headache and sometimes legal battles that ensue as a result.
What is the guarantee on your books?
So I am so confident that the material that I offer in these books will benefit those that invest their resources in them, that number one, if for whatever reason you end up with a failed contract, I will refund what you spent on your ebook. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pay up to $10,000 of your attorney's fees. And number three, I'm going to represent you as an expert witness at no cost. And my expert witness fees are anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000. I am very confident in the information I'm putting on the street, and confident that even if homeowners just take one or two nuggets away from my recommendations and ask the contractor to incorporate it into their contract, I can assure them it will be worth their time and effort.
If someone wanted to learn more about your books, where would they go?
They would go to OwnerzEdge.com.
And that's OwnerzEdge.com.
That is correct.
Well, this was very interesting, Paul. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it, JC, and hope that the listeners gained a nugget or two of information from it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a great interview.
Yeah, Paul has a lot of experience, and his books are a great resource if you're hiring a contractor.
Yep. What's his website again?
It's OwnerzEdge, and Owners has a Z. It's OwnerzEdge.com.
Cool. Let's wrap this up.
You can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe to that as well.
You can download our ebooks, Home Improvement Solutions, What Every Homeowner Should Know, books 1 through 18 on Amazon.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating and review.
You can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Instagram, Fix It Home Improvement.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.